Drizzt Do'Urden is a new commander from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. 3 green-white for a 3/3 double strike. When it enters the battlefield, create Guinevere, a 4/1 legendary creature token with trample. And whenever a creature dies, if it had power greater than Drizzt's power, put a number of +1/+1 counters on Drizzt equal to the difference. So, if you kill something with 7 power, Drizzt will then have 7 power. The power of whatever dies is what Drizzt is going to become. But Drizzt has double strike. This makes it so much easier for you to actually go off. If you want to one-shot someone, you'll only need 11 power. And if you want to two-shot someone, you'll only need 6. You still need evasion, but it becomes incredibly easy to deal huge amounts of damage. So let's look at some of the big cards we can sacrifice in order to two-shot our opponents. There are 7 cards in this category, and they all have pretty big advantages. Like Serra Ascendant, which can come out on turn 1, gain you a ton of life, and deal a ton of damage until you eventually play Drizzt. You can then sacrifice it and start dealing even more damage with Drizzt. Force of Savagery will die when it comes in and has 8 power. So we'll put Drizzt up to 8 powers. This way you don't have to worry about having a sacrifice outlet. The last card here is Pan-Glacial Worm. Pan-Glacial Worm is 7 mana for a 9/5. When you're searching your library, you may play Pan-Glacial Worm from your library. We can turn every single one of our cards, which will search through our library, into a way to get a big creature. So if we draw a piece of ramp later in the game, it's still just as good. Plus it's a 9/5 and we'll put Drizzt up very high in power. But what if we want to one-shot our opponents? We don't want slow two-shotting. Well, that's where the 11 plus power category comes in. So these are various cards with large powers and toughnesses which we can kill to then make Drizzt huge. So Ghalta, Primal Hunger, will cost X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control. Primeval Protector costs 1 less to cast for each creature your opponents control. If you've ever played Blasphemous Act, you will know how effective Primeval Protector will be. Ancient Stone Idol can either be played when you're attacking and get some decent reduction, or it can be played when an opponent is attacking and get likely huge amounts of reduction. It can also be used as a surprise blocker, and when it dies, not only will you put Drizzt up to 12 power, but you'll get a 6/12 as well. Titanoth Rex is an 11/11, and while it is 9 mana, it also has the option to cycle it and give something a trample counter. If you have a ton of mana, you can play it and make Drizzt huge. If you don't, then you can cycle it and give Drizzt evasion. And last, but certainly not least, is Fraxion Dreadnought. This is the best card in the deck, and is insanely powerful. But it's $100. It's 1 mana for a 12/12 with trample. When it comes into play, sacrifice any number of creatures with total power 12 or greater, or sacrifice Fraxion Dreadnought. Now, we will always choose to sacrifice Fraxion Dreadnought. And what we end up doing is paying 1 mana to put Drizzt up to 12 power. With double strike, that's an easy kill. But many of our creatures won't sacrifice themselves. So for this, we have sacrifice outlets. I'll let Anthony explain these.
Hey everyone, Anthony here from MTGAlpha. If we have to force a creature to die, we can do so by sacrificing it with a few cards. Ashnod's Altar and Phyrexian Altar are artifacts that allow you to sacrifice a creature and add mana to your mana pool. For Ashnod's Altar, you get 2 colorless mana, and for Phyrexian Altar, you would get 1 mana of any color. You can sacrifice a creature with High Market, a land that taps for colorless, but also allows you to tap, sacrifice a creature, you gain 1 life. Myron the Moaning Well is also a land that taps for a colorless and allows you to sacrifice a creature. If you pay 3 colorless and tap it, you would then gain life equal to that creature's toughness. This would make for an interesting play with a large enough creature getting sacrificed, gaining a bunch of life, and then moving counters onto Drizzt. With Natural Order, you pay 2 and 2 green, sacrifice a green creature, and search your library for a green creature and put it directly onto the battlefield. You can tutor for another creature that you can sacrifice, and with these triggers occurring in a single turn, you're sure to get ahead in the match.
This deck can also be super resilient because of our protection. There are various reasons why this works especially well, But one of the main ones is that Drizzt is the only creature we care about. If someone kills another of our creatures, that will likely just contribute to Drizzt being even larger. And that tends to be a good thing for us. So we have cards which will just protect Drizzt, like Whisper Silk, Cloak, Swiftfoot Boots, and Lightning Greaves. We also have other good cards which can protect many things, like Mother of Runes, Giver of Runes, Vines of Vastwood, and the Ozolith. And I will pass it off to MTGAlpha to explain our evasion.
Now we definitely want to be able to deal combat damage directly to our opponents with our commander and possibly win the game with commander damage in a single turn. The double strike helps, but we need some sort of evasion to get around potential blockers. Now we know Shield of the Oversoul can give our commander indestructible and flying. Abzan Falconer can also give our commander flying as long as it has a +1/+1 counter on it. We can give Drizzt protection from any color with Mother of Runes and Giver of Runes. With protection from a chosen color, the target creature wouldn't be able to be the target of spells of that color, and damage would be prevented from sources of that color as well. It would also make the creature unblockable if there are no creatures outside of that chosen color to block. Other ways to make our commander unblockable is with Whisper Silk Cloak and Rogue's Passage. Whisper Silk Cloak is a 3-mana artifact spell that costs 2 to equip. The equipped creature can't be blocked and has Shroud, meaning it can't be the target of any spells or abilities, including spells you control. Now, if we were in a situation where our creature has some legitimate blockers out, we can trample through them with Shadow Spear, Rancor, and Titanoth Rex, each of which give trample to our creature or commander. Shadow Spear also gives the equipped creature +1/+1 in lifelink.
We also have a few tutors like Worldly Tutor and Eladamri's Call. Most of the time we will search for a Fraxion Dreadnought with these, but we can also search for evasion, protection, or something else relevant.
So since we have a few ways to sacrifice our creatures, we want to make sure that the creatures we sacrifice are big enough to move counters onto our command. Berserk is a 1-mana instant. Cast Berserk only before the combat damage step. Target creature gains trample and gets +X+0 until end of turn, where X is its power. At the beginning of the next end step, destroy that creature if it attacked this turn. This is a great way to get even more counters onto Drizzt Do'Urden for only 1 mana, and can also be used as a potential removal spell given the right circumstances, considering the ability triggers as a result of any creature dying, including our opponents. With Branching Evolution, we can double the amount of counters that end up on our commander. Branching Evolution is a 3-mana enchantment that costs 2 and a green. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters will be put on a creature you control, twice that many are placed instead. We can also double our counters on Drizzt with Invigorating Surge, a 3-mana spell that costs 2 and a green. At instant speed, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, then double the number of +1/+1 counters on that creature. Solidarity of Heroes also doubles the number of +1/+1 counters on a target creature. It costs 1 and a green, and at instant speed, we can cast a spell targeting our commander, and if we happen to have other targets, we can pay an additional 1 and a green for each target beyond the first. When it comes to doubling counters, Ovorenclex Monstrous Raider works really well in this deck. It's a 6-mana, 6/6 legendary creature that costs 4 and 2 green. It has trample and haste, making it a serious threat on the board. But not only is this a powerful creature in the deck, it has an ability to double the amount of counters on any permanent you control whenever 1 or more counters are placed on that permanent. And to top it off, whenever an opponent would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, half that many counters are placed instead, rounded down. This includes planeswalkers, sagas, even poison counters. This is a very versatile card in many situations. Being that it is a 6/6, when it dies, we will most likely be placing counters on our commander as well. We can pump up our commander with ways other than using counters, with cards that simply increase its power. Naginata is a 1-mana artifact equipment spell that costs 2 to equip. It can only be attached to a creature with power 3 or greater, and when it's equipped, that creature gets +3/+0 and has trample. This spell is easily affordable, can increase the power of our commander, and given it trample on top of it already having double strike, it ends up dealing a lot of damage. We can also give Drizzt trample with Rancor. It gets +2/+0, and when Rancor is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return it to its owner's hand. Now, while we gear up Drizzt Do'Urden with abilities like trample, we can also give it indestructible and flying on top of it already having double strike. Shield of the Oversoul is a 3-mana enchantment or a spell that costs 2 and a green or white. As long as the enchanted creature is green, it gets +1/+1 and indestructible. As long as the enchanted creature is white, it gets +1/+1 in flying. These are two separate texts, therefore if the enchanted creature is green and white, like our commander, it gains both abilities. The green and white enchanted creature would get +2/+2, indestructible, and flying. This would make it very hard to deal with, and if it's not dealt with immediately, then we can easily win the game with commander damage, and even in just a few short turns, possibly take out each of our opponents. If one of our opponents tries to deal with our commander at this point, we can cast Vines of Vastwood, a 1-mana instant spell that would prevent our commander from being the target of any spell or abilities our opponents control. It has a kicker cost of just 1 green and would also give our creature +4/+4 until end of turn if that cost is paid. You want to destroy my creature? Well, now you can't. And also, it's even more of a threat, and I'm attacking you. Return of the Wildspeaker is another great card we can cast to pump up our creatures. It costs 4 and a green, and at instant speed, we can give non-human creatures we control +3/+3 until end of turn. Drizzt Do'Urden is a elf ranger, and therefore would benefit from this ability. We would also have the option to draw cards instead with its first ability. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control.
This deck is also great with running ramp. It has 14 cards in this category and can get a lot of mana very quickly. It has a few mana rocks like Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Selesnya Signet, and Talisman of Unity. It has land ramp like Nature's Lore, Rampant Growth, 3 Visits, Cultivate, Kodama's Reach, and Search for Tomorrow. And it also has other ramp like Selvala, Heart of the Wilds, which can both draw us cards and get us huge amounts of mana. The Great Henge, which can be super cheap to cast, get us huge amounts of mana and draw us cards. And lands which can ramp us like Myriad Landscape and Frozen Verge. The ability to consistently get out Drizzt early is going to be incredibly helpful and valuable in this deck.
With all of the pump spells and counters, we should very easily be able to draw lots of cards. Luckily, we're in green, so there's also plenty of other ways to draw cards as well. Harmonize is a 4-mana sorcery that simply draws you 3 cards. Not a bad trade-off. We can cast Hunter's Insight at instant speed for just 2 and a green. Choose target creature you control. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player or a planeswalker this turn, draw that many cards. Given that our creatures would potentially be dealing lots of damage to our opponents directly during combat, we would be able to draw a lot of cards once damage is dealt. Garruk Primal Hunter has a -3 ability that is basically the same as Return of the Wildspeaker. It allows you to draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. Rishkar's Expertise also has the same ability, but it costs 6 mana. The benefit of casting this card would be that you may also cast a card with CMC 5 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. Essentially, you would be drawing tons of cards for only 2 mana after casting any other spell from your hand for 5. The Grey Henge is a great addition in this deck. It is an artifact that costs 7 and 2 green, but also costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. It would be no issue at all to cast the Grey Henge for just 2 green. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. We get to draw a card whenever our creatures enter the battlefield, and they get a counter pumping them up and allowing us to double those counters later on. Selvala, Heart of the Wilds is a 3-mana, 2/3 creature that costs 1 and 2 green. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, its controller may draw a card if its power is greater than each other creature's power. Considering we would be playing lots of big creature spells, we would be able to draw a card whenever those creatures enter the battlefield. We can draw even more cards when we sacrifice them with cards like Life's Legacy and Momentous Fall. Life's Legacy is a 2-mana sorcery, and as an additional cost, sacrifice a creature. You draw cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power. Momentous Fall is a 4-mana instant spell and has the same ability, and then on top of that, you gain life equal to the sacrificed creature's toughness. When we sacrifice these big creatures, our commander's ability would trigger, and we can put a bunch of counters on Drizzt Do'Urden.
They also have a lot of removal. Most of these cards are pretty typical. I definitely had the urge to include cards like Divine Reckoning and Slash the Ranks, but board wipes are useful when you're losing. And when you're losing, these cards aren't necessarily going to solve your problem. Stuff that will end up destroying Drizzt is sadly the better choice, even though in Magical Christmas Land, Divine Reckoning is better.
Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.